US President Donald Trump is calling for elite university Harvard to lose its major tax break due to its management of anti-Semitism on campus. This comes hours after approximately $3.5 billion in federal grants and contracts were frozen for the institution. The White House is demanding Harvard make changes to hiring, admissions and teaching practices to fight anti-Semitism on campus.
When it comes to Harvard, as I said, the president has been quite clear they must follow federal law. He also wants to see Harvard apologize, and Harvard should apologize for the egregious anti-Semitism that took place on their college campus against Jewish American students. There were professors who said that he had engaged in discriminatory behavior against Jewish students. Of course, you had the former president of the university saying bullying and harassment depends on the context. You also had an encampment on Harvard Yard.
Harvard has become the first major university to reject the demands and is defending its commitment to fighting anti-Semitism. Since returning to office, the Trump administration has pushed to reshape top US universities, it says promote a leftist agenda by threatening to withhold federal funds. A group of academics are now threatening to sue the government over the funding freeze. Harvard President Alan Garber has issued a public letter hitting out at the government. He says the administration's prescription goes beyond the power of the federal government. It threatens our values as a private institution devoted to the pursuit, production and dissemination of knowledge. No government, regardless of which party is in power, should dictate what private universities can teach, whom they can admit and hire, and which areas of study and inquiry they can pursue. Sarah Brown is the senior news editor at the Chronicle of Higher Education, and she joins us now from Washington, D.C. Sarah, thank you for your time. Now, as we saw there, Harvard is not complying with this. We'll get into the demands on them in a moment, but tell us, what sort of monetary cost is this stand by Harvard coming at? What's the context here?
Right. So we are talking about a lot of money, right? We are talking about billions of US dollars. Harvard does receive around, $9 billion is sort of at issue in sort of multi-year grants and contracts. And so this is not all of Harvard's government funding, but it is a lot. It funds a lot of research grants. We're already hearing, for example, cancellations of grants on sort of important cancer research and, the impact of space flight on the human body. We're already seeing these grants being canceled and frozen over the Trump administration's sort of this conflict with the federal government.
And you say it's going to impact the hospital systems in Boston, for example, amongst other things. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so Harvard University works with a number of hospital systems in Boston. As a lot of its federal funding is kind of is doled out through these various affiliates in across the Boston area, and so any impact on federal research funding to Harvard would also have those ripple effects, across all of those different health systems that are affiliated with the university, and so, the impacts are really significant, and I think Harvard is, despite the fact that it is risking a lot of federal funding, it is deciding at this stage to say, we are not going to concede to these demands that the Trump administration has made because we find them to be inappropriate for, it's inappropriate for a university to allow this level of government influence in its operations.
Now, Trump has really upped the ante with his demands on Harvard. Tell us, in essence, what he is asking or demanding of them.
Yeah, so this new letter of demands that Harvard University basically said we will not be complying with this letter. It went a little bit further than an earlier letter of demands that went to Columbia University, and Columbia actually did make some changes in response to this demand letter to try to restore some of its federal funding that had been canceled. And, the Harvard demand letter went a little bit further than Columbia. So, for instance, it asked the university to turn over admissions and hiring data for audit to the federal government for until 2028, so for years. It asked the university to reform international admissions and ensure that it was not admitting students who were sort of quote unquote hostile to American values. It asked for the university to do an audit of quote unquote viewpoint diversity across its campus community. And so these are, really, these are much more specific and prescriptive changes in some ways than we've seen in the past. And this is where, Harvard sort of drew a line and said, we are not going to be allowing the government to dictate what they think we should be sort of doing in our operations, because there's been this historic sort of understanding that in the US, universities should operate free from government interference. That really has been the stance that has been taken historically and upheld in the courts, and that it's really important for the pursuit of teaching, research, and knowledge production that universities are able to operate without that government influence.
And this brings up references to Columbia University. Tell us what happened there and the similarities and also differences in the demands put on them and the response to that.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, similar situation in which Columbia is being sort of looked at and scrutinized for its handling of anti-Semitism on campus, mostly related to protests over the war in Gaza. And Columbia was asked to, the Trump administration, basically, this was the first time that they had made a letter of demands. And so the Trump administration asked them to reform their student disciplinary procedures and expel some students. It asked them to put a particular academic department, the Middle East Studies Department, under more oversight. And Columbia did make a lot of the changes that the Trump administration suggested. Also gave their security force on campus more power, arrest powers, to manage situations if a protest, for example, gets out of hand. And so Columbia did make those changes. There was a lot of criticism from the academic community, seeing, that they felt that Columbia had capitulated. And in that fallout, the interim president of Columbia actually stepped aside. And so we're still sort of seeing the impacts of that. And Harvard has clearly taken a different stance. Now, there are some important differences, right? Columbia had already had federal funding, government funding completely canceled. In Harvard University's case, to be clear, I think I misspoke earlier, but it has not been canceled. It's been frozen, right? And so that's still very disruptive, but there are some important differences in that situation. But we are also seeing a very different response from Harvard University. And I think a lot of people in the academic community here in the US have been looking for a university to take a stand, to really tell the Trump administration this is inappropriate for the government to be taking these kinds of to do this kind of interference in sort of the university itself.
So, Sarah, is this a turning point, do you think?
I think a lot of academics and higher education observers here in the US think that this could potentially be a turning point. Now, it is a risk, right? Because we are talking about billions of dollars. And even Harvard, which is one of the wealthiest universities in the world, does not just have billions and billions in cash sitting around. It may have a multi-billion-dollar endowment, but that's not something that you can just get some cash out of the bank and stop the gap and no problem. It doesn't really work that way. And so they are actually taking some steps. They are they're raising money from Wall Street. They are exploring all of their options because they are prepared for this to potentially turn into a prolonged court fight with the Trump administration over their grant dollars.